Get on the wall. Hands where I can see them. Now, the voice came from behind. Marcus Webb had just stepped out of his car, a midnight blue Cadillac CT5, paid off, parked legally in the lot attached to the Cuyahoga County Justice Center, and he had not even closed the door yet. He turned slowly. The officer was already moving toward him, one hand on his belt. "Officer," Marcus's voice was quiet, even. "Good morning. I haven't done anything wrong," I said, hands on the wall. The officer, badge number 3847, white male, mid-30s, body camera tilted slightly down, grabbed Marcus by the arm and moved him toward the concrete wall of the parking structure. "We've had reports of a suspicious vehicle in this lot." Marcus placed his hands on the wall. He counted. That was the first violation. Reasonable articulable suspicion. Absent. He was aware of a woman in a blue sedan slowing to look. A man in a hard hat pulled out his phone and started filming with a half grin, like he'd found entertainment for his lunch break. A courthouse clerk in a gray coat saw what was happening, looked directly at Marcus, and walked faster toward the building. "I own this vehicle," Marcus said. "I can show you my registration. We'll get to that." The officer patted him down. Second violation. No justification for a Terry stop. No weapon. No threat. Nothing. "What's your business here?" "I work here." The officer laughed. Not loud. Just enough. "Right. Doing what?" "I'll answer that in a moment. You'll answer it now." The officer pulled both of Marcus's wrists behind his back. The metal of the handcuffs was cold. It clicked twice. Tight. Tighter than necessary. And Marcus felt the pressure on the bones of his wrists. He kept his hands still. Third violation. Unlawful detention. Fourth. Excessive force during restraint of a non-resisting individual. He had reached 4 before they even moved toward the cruiser. He had no idea. Officer Derek Pruitt had stopped a black man in an expensive car outside the Cuyahoga County Justice Center on a Tuesday morning and had no idea who Marcus Webb was. Because in 47 minutes, every person in this parking lot was going to understand exactly what Derek Pruitt had done, and none of them would ever forget it. But this story doesn't start here. Rewind 18 months. Marcus James Webb, 54 years old, had been appointed to the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas by the governor of Ohio after 22 years as a defense attorney, 8 of which he spent as a public defender in the same county where he now served. His docket ran criminal law, major felonies, appeals, sentencing reviews. He had presided over 1,400 cases. He had written opinions cited by courts in 11 states. Colleagues described him as precise, quiet, and unimprovable in his preparation. His staff described him as the kind of judge who remembered your name and your kid's school and your father's surgery without being asked. On his desk, to the left of his monitor, sat a small framed photograph, a younger Marcus in a graduation gown, Howard University School of Law, 1995. Standing beside a man in his early 60s with tired eyes and hands that looked like they'd been worked past their limit. Raymond Webb had driven a city bus for the Cleveland Transit System for 31 years. He died of a coronary in 2019. He never saw his son take the bench. He came close enough that Marcus sometimes spoke to that photograph before walking into court. Not out of ritual, but out of something simpler than that. Something that didn't need a name. On this particular Tuesday morning, Marcus had woken at 5:40 a.m. He had a 9 a.m. pretrial motion on an aggravated assault case, State v. Rollins, and he had spent the early morning reviewing the defense's suppression argument, which was actually quite good, and which he would hear fairly regardless of how the day started. He had eaten a bowl of oatmeal. He had kissed his wife Diana, a senior investigator with the Cleveland FBI field office, who had kissed him back and told him he had oatmeal on his collar, and he had changed his shirt. He had driven the 18 minutes from Shaker Heights to the Justice Center. He had parked legally. He had not broken a single law. Derek Pruitt had been with the Cleveland Police Department for 11 years. He had 2 commendations, a city council citation for community engagement, a photograph on the precinct wall from 2019 where he was shaking hands with the mayor. He had also been the subject of 17 complaints in those 11 years. Excessive force, 4 times. Unlawful detention, 6 times. Racially discriminatory conduct, 7 times. Each complaint had been reviewed by an internal affairs unit, reporting to a deputy chief, who had promoted Derek Pruitt's training sergeant. 14 of the 17 complaints were dismissed without action. 2 resulted in written reprimands that were expunged from his file after 18 months per union contract. 1 was still under review. Had been for 3 years. Derek Pruitt had never once faced a meaningful consequence. This morning, he had spotted a man in a dark Cadillac in the Justice Center lot and had decided, in a moment that took him less than 2 seconds, that the man looked like someone who should be questioned. In the holding area adjacent to the Justice Center parking office, a glass-walled room normally used for transport processing, Marcus sat in a plastic chair with his wrist cuffed to a steel ring on the table. A second officer, a younger woman named Sergeant Caldwell, stood near the door. She hadn't spoken since Pruitt brought him in. She was watching. Pruitt set a yellow notepad on the table. Name, Marcus James Webb. Address, I'll provide that once I've spoken to an attorney. You're not under arrest. Pruitt leaned back. This is a voluntary interview. If I were free to leave, Marcus said, I'd leave. Since I'm handcuffed to a table, I'd prefer counsel before answering further questions. Pruitt tapped the notepad. The registration on that car comes back to a Webb, Diana. That your wife? I'd like to exercise my right to counsel. Your kind always has an answer for everything. Caldwell shifted her weight by the door. She didn't say anything. She had been a sergeant for 14 months. She had 3 complaints of her own, all dismissed. And she had learned, in the way you learn things at a precinct like this one, that there were conversations you did not enter and decisions you did not question. She told herself Marcus had probably done something. She wanted that to be true because the alternative was harder. She watched him sit with his hands still and his face calm, and she told herself again that there was probably something here she didn't know about. Outside, in the Justice Center lobby, a security officer named Antoine had been watching the parking lot camera when Pruitt made the stop. Antoine had been working this building for 9 years. He recognized Judge Webb on the camera immediately. He had seen him walk into this building 5 days a week for 2 years. He picked up his radio, then set it down. He looked at his supervisor's office. Empty. Supervisor was at a briefing. He picked up his cell phone and sent a text message to the clerk of courts, a woman named Patricia Okafor, who had worked in this building for 26 years, and who received the text, read it, and was already walking toward the office of the presiding judge before she finished typing her reply. It had been 23 minutes since Marcus was detained. In the holding room, Derek Pruitt was explaining to Marcus that he had every right to detain individuals acting suspiciously in proximity to the Justice Center, and that this was for everyone's safety, and that if Marcus just cooperated, this would all be resolved quickly. He said this with the calm of a man who had said similar things many times and had never once been wrong. He smiled. He pulled out his own phone and sent a message to a friend at the precinct. Caught a live one, he wrote. Fancy car, fancy attitude. Gonna be a long morning for this guy. His friend replied with a laughing emoji. 11 minutes left. Patricia Okafor did not knock. She walked directly into the office of presiding judge Alicia Ferreira, who was on the phone with a budget administrator, and she stood in the doorway until Ferreira looked up, read Okafor's face, and said into the phone, "I'll call you back." Ferreira listened for 30 seconds. Then she picked up her own phone and called the chief of the Justice Center Security Division, a former deputy marshal named Robert Kiang, who was already on his way to the parking lot because Antoine had also called him directly. Meanwhile, in the parking lot where it had all started, the man in the hard hat was still watching his footage. He had replayed it twice. He sent it to a friend with a message that said simply, "Crazy out here." His friend shared it to a private group. 11 minutes had passed since Marcus had been taken inside. Diana Webb was still in her field briefing at the FBI field office when her phone buzzed with Antoine's message. She read it once. She read it again. She set the phone face down on the conference table and breathed for 3 seconds. Then she turned it over, typed "Be there in 30, and slid the phone into her jacket pocket. She waited 4 minutes, long enough not to raise a scene, and then stepped quietly out of the room. In the hallway, she called Antoine directly. He told her what he'd seen. She thanked him. She walked to the elevator. She was already composing the next 3 moves in her head before she reached the parking garage. In the holding room, Derek Pruitt had put down his notepad and was now leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, the way a man leans when he is no longer working and is simply waiting for the next thing to confirm that he was right all along. He had texted his sergeant a brief summary: detained suspect in J.C. Lot, now in interview, probable falsified registration. His sergeant had replied, "Nice work. Stay on it." Pruitt felt good. He had been doing this job for 11 years, and he had learned, in the way you learn things in 11 years, that the noise always settled. Complaints went to Internal Affairs. Internal Affairs talked to people who knew him. Things got sorted. He had 17 complaints behind him, and his badge was still on his chest, and his picture was still on the wall, and he had a city council citation in a frame in his living room. He would be fine. He was always fine. 3 minutes left. Marcus sat with his wrists on the table and finished his count. Violation 9. Prolonged detention without probable cause. He looked at the wall and thought, with the particular clarity that comes to a man who has reviewed 10,000 pages of case law, that this was exactly the pattern he had described 2 months ago in a continuing legal education lecture at Cleveland Marshall College of Law. He had titled the talk "Structural Accountability Gaps in Municipal Law Enforcement Review." He had used the phrase "complaint laundering" to describe the practice of routing complaints through supervisors with personal relationships to the subject officers. And 2 people in the room had laughed uncomfortably, and he had looked at them and said, "This is not a metaphor." He thought about that room. He thought about the attendees who had taken notes and the ones who had not. He thought about the young public defenders in the back row who were going to spend the next 30 years of their careers in rooms exactly like this one, on the other side of the table, fighting for clients who had even less than he did. He looked at his wrists in the cuffs. He thought, someone has to be in the room. Caldwell was near the door. She had not spoken in 14 minutes. She could hear Chang's footsteps in the hallway before the door opened. Chang reached the holding room in 4 minutes. He opened the door, looked at the scene. Marcus Webb handcuffed to a table, Derek Pruitt leaning against the wall with a notepad, and said, in a voice that had no particular emotion in it, "Officer, step outside with me." Pruitt looked at Chang, then at Marcus, then back at Chang. "We're in the middle of a outside. Now." Pruitt came out. The door closed. Marcus could hear voices but not words. He sat in the quiet and looked at his wrists. He thought about State v. Rollins, whose pre-trial motion was now 20 minutes overdue. He thought about a young man named Dion Rollins, 22, sitting in a courtroom upstairs waiting for a judge to show up. He thought about his father's hands in that photograph. He thought about how many times he had sat across from clients in rooms not very different from this one and had told them, stay calm, stay precise, document everything. He was on violation 9. He had been counting since the parking lot. Caldwell stood near the door. She could hear Chiang's voice outside, low and flat. She turned and looked at Marcus for the first time since they'd entered the room. Really looked. He was in a suit. A dark one, well-fitted, white pocket square. His shoes were the kind that cost money and got maintained. He had reading glasses pushed up on his head. He was sitting with his back straight and his hands still, and he was not afraid. That was the part that caught her. He was not afraid. She had watched hundreds of people sit in chairs in rooms like this one, and almost all of them looked afraid, even when they were trying not to. Marcus Webb looked like a man with somewhere better to be, who was being patient about getting there. She thought, I'm going to have to write a report about this. The door opened. Chiang came back in. He looked at Marcus. Your Honor, he said, I'm sorry. I am deeply sorry. Pruitt appeared in the doorway. His notepad was gone. His hand was at his side. Something had left his face, the particular quality that had been there all morning, the performance of certainty, and what was underneath it was smaller and less organized. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Marcus did not move immediately. He let a moment pass. If you could remove the cuffs, he said. I have a pre-trial motion to conduct. Robert Chiang removed the handcuffs himself. He would later include that detail in his incident report. That he, personally, uncuffed the Honorable Marcus J. Webb, 54th Judge of the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas, as a way of making a record that he understood what had happened, and who bore responsibility for correcting it. Derek Pruitt stood in the hallway outside the holding room while this happened. He was looking at the floor. Caldwell was already at her phone, reading a message from the precinct lieutenant that said, simply, do not leave that location. Marcus stood. He straightened his cuffs. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair where Pruitt had draped it when he'd patted him down, and he put it on. He looked at Pruitt once, not with anger, not with triumph, just the flat, precise attention of someone who has read a situation completely. Officer Pruitt, he said, I'd recommend calling your union representative. He walked out. He was 14 minutes late to his own courtroom. His clerk met him in the hallway with his robe and a look that said she knew and was furious on his behalf and would not be speaking about it here. He put the robe on in the hallway, walked in, took his seat. Dion Rollins's defense attorney, who had been waiting and wondering, stood. Your Honor, we were. I apologize for the delay, Marcus said. Let's proceed. Counsel, your motion. He heard the motion. He asked precise questions. He took notes. He ruled the suppression argument was good, and he said so, and he scheduled the next hearing. He walked through that morning's docket, item by item, measured and thorough, and no one in the courtroom who was there for the first time would have known that anything unusual had occurred. But Robert Chiang had filed his incident report by 10 a.m. The report went to the presiding judge, to the administrative office of the courts, and to the Cleveland Police Department's Office of Professional Standards. At 10:17 a.m., Patricia Okafor sent an email to the court's communications contact that was not, technically, a press release, but it contained facts, and it was sent to 4 local news organizations. By noon, all 4 had called the department's public affairs office for comment. Diana Webb had been in a field briefing at the FBI field office when Antoine's name appeared on her phone. She stepped into the hallway, listened, said I understand, hung up, walked back into the briefing, and asked the supervising agent if she could take 45 minutes on a personal matter. She drove to the Justice Center. She arrived exactly as Marcus was taking a 15-minute break between hearings. They sat in his chambers. He told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she said, "Did they get his badge number?" 3847. She nodded. "I'll make some calls. Let the process work," he said. She looked at him for a moment. She had been married to this man for 27 years. She had watched him say those words, "Let the process work," in every form they could take, including the most difficult form, which was saying them when the process had already failed. "Okay," she said, "but I'm going to make sure someone's watching the process." She pulled out her phone and opened her contacts and found a name she had been saving for exactly this kind of day. By 3 p.m., the Cleveland Police Department had received a formal request from the Administrative Court Office to preserve all body camera and security footage related to the incident. By 4 p.m., the department's Office of Professional Standards had opened a formal investigation. By 4:30 p.m., a producer from Hughes News Channel 5 was in the Justice Center lobby asking questions. Derek Pruitt was placed on administrative leave pending investigation at 5:02 p.m. He was told to surrender his badge and his service weapon. He called his union representative. He called his wife. He sat in his car in the precinct lot for 40 minutes before driving home. The body camera footage was reviewed by the Office of Professional Standards and by an independent attorney appointed by the mayor's office. The footage showed the following. Pruitt had no documented justification for the initial stop. The report he filed listed suspicious behavior without specifying any observable behavior. The pat-down was conducted without consent and without legal justification. The handcuffing was conducted without arrest and without documented emergency circumstance. The statement, "Your kind always has an answer for everything," was captured clearly on audio. The internal affairs files on Pruitt's 17 prior complaints were subpoenaed as part of the investigation. The deputy chief who had overseen the dismissal of 14 of those complaints was placed on administrative review. The union contract provision allowing the expungement of reprimands from disciplinary files was referred to the city legal department for review. 6 weeks after the incident, Marcus Webb stood in a conference room at the Justice Center with his attorney, Diana, beside him, and spoke at a press availability that he had agreed to after declining 3 weeks of interview requests. He did not speak about his anger. He spoke about structure. "I am sharing this publicly, not because I want sympathy," he said, "but because most black men who experience what I experienced in that parking lot do not have what I have. A courtroom to return to, a record that speaks, an institution that moves when I am wronged. The man who was in that parking lot with me this morning has no recourse that moves at that speed. That is the story, not me." That, he paused. He looked at his notes, then set them down. "I did not announce my title when Officer Pruitt detained me. People have asked me why. The answer is simple. The next person he stops will not be a judge. If my title is the thing required to produce basic dignity, then the system is already broken. The answer is not more judges in the parking lot. The answer is a different standard of accountability, one that does not require a person to produce credentials to be treated as a human being." He thanked the investigators who had moved quickly. He acknowledged Robert Chiang by name. He acknowledged Patricia Okafor. He said nothing about Caldwell, who had submitted a voluntary written statement to the investigation describing in detail what she had observed in the holding room. That statement had been noted and was under review. He did not thank Derek Pruitt for anything. Derek Pruitt was terminated from the Cleveland Police Department 4 months after the incident, following completion of the Office of Professional Standards investigation. The investigation found violations of departmental policy in 6 areas. It also found that his supervisors had been aware of the pattern in his complaint history and had failed to act. The department reached a settlement with Marcus Webb. The terms were not disclosed, and issued a formal written apology signed by the chief of police that acknowledged unlawful detention and excessive force. The deputy chief, who had overseen the dismissal of 14 complaints, resigned before the investigation concluded. His pension was subject to a separate civil review. Pruitt appealed his termination through his union. The appeal was denied. He was permanently barred from employment in law enforcement in the state of Ohio. As of the date of this video, he works in property management. He has not issued a public statement. Sergeant Caldwell was not terminated. She was transferred to a community liaison role and enrolled in a department training program on bias-free policing. Her voluntary statement was described by the investigators as courageous and consequential. She later said, in an interview she gave on the record, that she had watched Marcus Webb sit in that room, and she had known, not suspected, that something was wrong, and that she had done nothing until someone else opened the door. She said she thinks about that every day. Antoine, the security officer who sent the text, was given a commendation by the presiding judge's office. He keeps it in a frame on his desk at the Justice Center, next to a photograph of his daughter. 3 weeks after the incident, an anonymous donation in the amount of $4.00 was made to a nonprofit legal aid organization that provides free counsel to individuals detained without charge in Cuyahoga County. The donor has not been identified. The man in the hard hat, who filmed the stop while grinning, has not been seen in the parking lot since. Marcus Webb returned to work the morning after the incident, as he had said he would. He heard arguments. He wrote opinions. His clerk brought him coffee the way she always had. The photograph of his father and himself in 1995 sat to the left of his monitor. His docket has not slowed. The cases keep coming, one after the next, each one with a person at the center of it who needs a fair hearing, which is the thing a court is supposed to provide, and which is the thing Marcus Webb goes to work to provide. Every morning, in a building where not very long ago he stood at a cold concrete wall with his hands raised and counted violations and waited. Until this stops being necessary, he told Diana on the drive home that evening, someone has to be in the room. She kept her eyes on the road. She had heard him say something like this before, in different forms, across all the years. Then we keep being in the room, she said. If this story made you feel something, anger, recognition, or just the need to think, share it with someone. Because Marcus's story is not rare. It is Tuesday morning in parking lots across this country. The difference is who is watching, who is documenting, and who refuses to be silent about what they saw. Drop a comment below. Have you ever watched something wrong happen and felt powerless to intervene? And what did you do? We read every comment, because this channel exists for that conversation. Subscribe for more stories that name what happened, honor the people who kept their dignity anyway, and refuse to let the record stay buried. Because every view is a choice about what we say matters. Someone has to be watching. That's why we're here.